Hello and welcome to a PowerPoint by Hatching Results. Today I'm going to talk about what school counselors need to know about LCFF and LCAP. So what is LCAP, LCFF and LCAP, you might ask? Well, you could listen as it explained below if you go to the website that you see on the screen here. The San Marcos Unified School District Superintendent did a really good job of talking about what LCFF is and what LCAP is. But at the end, I would ask you to ask yourself, what did you hear and what did you not hear? What I heard was a very good explanation, but what I did not hear was how school counselors are included or involved. I didn't hear that school counselors were part of the suggested people that would be included. This does not mean that San Marcos isn't going to be supporting school counselors. It just means that they weren't mentioned exactly. And this is part of why I'm doing this presentation. Because if school counselors aren't included in the surveys, if we're not included as a suggestion for people to choose from, if we're not on the list of ideas that people have to choose from as they think about what could we do with these funds for our underrepresented, underserved students, for our legislatively protected students, if the offering of school counseling as one additional idea for increased services is not on any survey or list, people might not think of it. They might make assumptions that school counseling is already paid for by the central office at a reasonable ratio and that all students will get what they need. Unfortunately, it's my experience that this is not the case. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what the concerns are. LCFF and LCAP regulations and subsequent conversations have been silent on the way school counselors support these 8 priorities. And the legislatively protected youth that they refer to are English learners, limited income families, and foster youth. What does silent mean? Silent means, well, it just doesn't say school counselors anywhere. So you, as the school counselor, or if you're a parent or a stakeholder or administrator or anyone who's concerned that students receive the academic, the personal, social, and the college and career readiness support they need to say to yourself, what the heck is my district's plan? Because if I don't know my district's plan, then you don't know whether or not school counseling services will be available for your child. So, one thing you need to know if you live in California, unlike some other states, is that there's absolutely no law that requires school counselors. Absolutely no law. School counselors are not required, not even in high schools. There is no guarantee that any student, needy or otherwise, will receive any counseling services. Now, some school districts choose to fund school counselors, but others don't. And as a result, California has one of the worst ratios of school counseling to students in the nation. Now, years ago, we had some categorical programs. You may have heard of 10th grade school counseling funds, SB 813, or AB 1113, or AB 1802. These categorical funded programs provided supplemental funding for school counselors, and many districts relied on these funds in order to reduce the ratios of school counselors in their district. Some school counselors had ratios of 700 to 1 or 800 to 1 before AB 1802 came, and when schools added additional counselors, their caseloads were reduced. The problem is that with the new local control funding formula, most categorical programs have been eliminated, and the school counseling programs are some of the ones. Let me show you. Here are all the categorical programs under LCFF. Notice the arrow points to grades 7 through 12 counseling and school safety competitive grants, and many other items on here where schools and districts may choose to spend some categorical funding hiring or providing professional development for professional school counselors to provide the students the services they need. Notice under the eliminated program that grades 7 through 12 and school safety funds are no longer there. This is a cause for serious concern. We should make no assumptions that local decision makers will promote or protect school counseling services if California does not require it. As history has been our best predictor, the answer is absolutely not, because in 2010, California shifted what we called our categorical funding into buckets, and when they did this, they required no accountability for the districts. During this time, Many districts chose to eliminate school counseling positions, and throughout the state of California, there was a 13% reduction in the number of school counselors. As a result, many schools have far less school counselors, and some have no school counselors at all. This graph here, this chart shows that during the years 2006, 7, 8, 9, we had a large increase in the number of school counselors. We were steadily increasing, but when budget cuts hit and when categorical funding became flexible, this meant that schools and districts could choose to spend those flexible dollars in any way they chose. And the problem for school counseling programs was that because many of those school counseling positions were funded through categorical funds, well, districts or school sites could make new choices with these funds, and they could spend it on anything they wanted. The funds themselves, let's be very clear, did not go away. The amount of money remained, but the districts were given flexibility on how they spent it, and they eliminated any accountability requirements for how the funds were spent. Some school counselors, and I've even heard some administrators, mistakenly believe that the funds were eliminated. This is absolutely not the truth. The requirements for how districts had to spend the funds, that was eliminated. And when flexibility occurred, you can see what happened to the number of school counselors who are employed in districts in California. The new funding requires that 8 areas of state priority must be addressed. These areas are, starting at the top and clockwise, student engagement, other student outcomes, parental involvement, course access, implementation of Common Core state standards, basic services, school climate, and student achievement. As someone who's been working with school counseling my entire career, I looked at these 8 areas and said, of course, school counselors are involved in all of these areas. This will be an easy fit for us. Let's take a look and see how school counselors perform, school counseling programs support all these 8 areas. Data-driven, accountable school counseling programs have been shown to produce results that support the condition of learnings in all of the pupil outcome requirements. Here are the 8 areas, and it may be hard to see it, but you'll notice I have a source at the bottom there, and you can go to that source if you'd like. You'll see under student achievement, you're talking about performance of standardized tests, but you're also talking about English language learners' proficiencies, reclassification, sharing of students, share of students who are determined to be prepared for college by the early access program. So student achievement isn't just test scores. It's students college and career ready and many other indicators that will be listed here. Under student engagement, attendance, so important, and counselors work so much with attendance and dropout. Other student indicators of student performance required, and these could include some performance exams. We will look at that in a moment. School climate, of course, all students will learn better when school climate's improved, and school counselors are a very big part of helping to support school climate. Parental involvement, absolutely necessary for school counselors. Basic services, we'll talk about this. This is important because just as you want to make sure teachers are not misassigned, so too should we make sure school counselors are not misassigned and that they have appropriate instructional materials. When it comes to Common Core, school counselors have wonderful documents that support their role in Common Core and making sure all students are receiving Common Core and that counselors are partnering with teachers to make sure the implementation of Common Core is for all students to be college and career ready. And of course, so important, the counselor's advocacy with course access. So let's go over these a little more detail. School counselors promote student achievement by helping students and parents understand the nature of these tests. You know, if they're going to require students to take them, it's a very good idea if counselors help parents understand what do they mean when they get their score back. How do I help prepare my child? How concerned should I be? And this was one area where previously AB 1802 was very helpful because there was a clear expectation that any student who didn't score as proficient, or any student who was non-proficient, or any student who didn't pass the CASE would receive an automatic meeting with the school counselor and the parents to go over the concerns and to prepare that child for the remediation necessary and the intervention necessary so that they could be prepared to move from middle school to high school and to graduate high school. One of the concerns of AB 1802 legislation no longer requiring school counselors to do this is there's no expectation, and no requirement, and no accountability that any student who is performing below proficient or who's not passing state standardized tests in terms of high school exit exams tests will meet with anybody. And that's a very serious concern. Because if students and parents don't understand the impact of their scores on these standardized tests and the necessity for intervention and the impact it could have on their ability to graduate on time, then that's a very serious concern. And school counselors are very integral in this. School counselors often support students learning test-taking strategies or making sure they get referrals to that. They provide interventions. They encourage enrollment in rigorous courses and early assessment programs. So that they can find out early in high school whether or not they're going to be passing the EAP, so that when they do go on to college, they're ready to enter the appropriate language courses and math courses. And collaborating with parents and students and families when these concerns arise is a very significant portion of the school counselor's responsibility. In terms of pupil engagement, school counselors promote this by monitoring attendance data, providing individual and group counseling interventions for students who are truant, students who aren't coming to school, any student and family who might have a need in this area of being engaged in school, referring them to intervention services, collaborating with the alternative education opportunities, and by participating in SARB meetings and any other meeting that helps support student engagement in schools. Oftentimes, school counselors lead these types of school-wide interventions, and often, almost always, they should be a participant absolutely on the leadership team addressing these needs in any school. Other student outcomes. Some schools are categorizing other school student outcomes to include things like enrollment patterns and students' participation in or scores on ACT, SAT, PSAT, CASE, their successful or partnership with taking or completing career technical education programs, the number of opportunities students have to participate in these internships or job shadowing opportunities, enrollment in and successful completion of community college and four-year college. All of these are additional student outcomes that directly align with the work of a school counselor. School climate. Boy, this is so important for counselors because they are integral as a leader on the campus in participating in PBIS programs with school-wide behavior programs, analyzing and looking at the climate data with the California Healthy Kids Survey data, delivering evidence-based curriculum and interventions, monitoring the impact of these interventions, and doing a school-wide, small group, individual, using that RTI model to move up the intervention pyramid so that the students get the interventions that they need. School counselors are integral to all this, whether it's a school-wide peace patrol or peer mediation program, working with parents and families, advocating for equitable policies. This is absolutely the work of a school counselor. Parent involvement, as I've mentioned previously, that school counselors are involved with parents and making sure they receive all the education previously mentioned around graduation requirements, college entrance requirements, SAT, all of those things, but also parents' involvement in serving on a wide variety of parent committees, like advisory committees, participating in SSTs and IEPs, providing these parent workshops, seeking feedback from the parents, finding out, are we meeting your needs? What do you need more of? Attending parent evening events, ensuring that parents are involved and that the information is presented in their language so that they can understand it, making sure that the communication at home and on the internet is welcoming to the family's cultural needs and language needs. Basic services. School counselors promote basic service by providing equitable student access to fully credentialed teachers and school counselors. School counselors need to be advocates for noticing that if there is a teacher that's not credentialed in an area and they're involved in placing students in that class. School counselors can be advocates for ensuring that courses are being taught by teachers who have the credential in the area, the experience in the area, and that when they're hiring new school counselors, that they're hiring school counselors who also have the training and background they need to meet the needs of the students in the school. Ensuring marginalized groups have access to high-quality standards-based instruction, being an advocate to make sure that those groups receive equitable talent of instruction by teachers, and that they're not always receiving just the new substitute this week. And unfortunately, that can happen in places where there's not a school counselor or someone looking out, because if the student isn't advocating and the parent isn't advocating, who's going to be advocating to make sure that the marginalized groups are receiving the same equitable, excellent education that the other students are receiving? Advocating for change when students are receiving developmentally inappropriate instructional materials. As a school counselor, you might notice that a general education class is receiving materials and instructions that are far less rigorous than would be appropriate for a student at that level. When some schools have situations, unfortunately, where they're still tracking students, and some students are being placed into courses where the rigor is just far beneath where it needs to be for our Common Core standards. Every student should have the opportunity to take college preparatory courses, and the school counselor is integrally involved with ensuring that when students or parents or families are concerned that their child's not being encouraged or supported to take rigorous courses, that maybe they visit classrooms, review instructional material, and take a look. Many school counselors have been teachers themselves, and most good school counseling training programs now have teacher components of their school counseling programs, so that school counselors are learning about what it takes to provide appropriate instruction in the classroom, how to teach curriculum in the classroom, and what to look for developmentally and what's appropriate for students learning in terms of instructional materials. So a school counselor needs to partner with teachers and others at the school to make sure that when they notice these inequities, that they have a voice as an advocate for students. Common Core state standards. School counselors promote Common Core by supporting and promoting that climate of high expectation, as I was just mentioning. Participating on those leadership teams and those database decision-making teams and intervention teams. Ensuring all students have access to these career-focused lessons, and not just those that some people decide are going to go to college, but that every student has the opportunity to hear, what would it take to graduate? What would it take to go to college? How can I be prepared? What courses do I need to take? And ensure that students receive that 6-year individualized learning plan and, when necessary, Tier 2 or Tier 3 interventions. Course access. I mentioned this a little before, but I'm going to mention it very strongly now. School counselors are key to promoting equity and access to these opportunities for college and career. Using data, the school counselor is the primary person who can notice when some students can't get access to taking the college prep courses they need, when there are opportunity or attainment gaps, when there are curriculum guide handbooks that deny students access to taking a college prep, an honors, or an AP course. School counselors are perfectly positioned to be the student advocate for equitable access and enrollment in all of these courses, ensuring that the program of study for all students aligns with their college and career aspirations, and ensuring that the systems of support are in place for students who need additional assistance as well. When it comes to legislatively protected youth, districts that have 55% or greater percentage will receive additional money. Legislatively protected youth are defined as English language learners, limited income students, and foster youth. These districts will qualify for these funding, and these supplemental dollars can be spent on school-wide purposes. In order to do this, the Local Control Accountability Plan will need to specify how these expenses will contribute to raising the achievement for these targeted youth. So, legislatively protected youth. When you think about the role of a school counselor, so often school counselors are involved supporting students with inconsistent attendance, who have language barriers, who lack the access to resources, and frequent school transfers can compromise the academic success of these students. So students in legislatively protected groups often require additional counseling intervention and support and assistance, not only from the school counselor, but from the entire student support team, and sometimes from referrals within the community. The school counselor is a key member of this team that is looking to see how can we support legislatively protected youth to ensure not only that they get everything equitably that every other student receives, but they receive additional supporting intervention when needed, and that funds that are targeted for legislatively protected youth actually go towards ensuring their needs are met and the services are provided for them. The school counselor's advocacy voice is strongly needed here. Do you want to know how much money your district's getting? There's a website you can go to. How much money will your school district get? And when you put in your website and your district, you can find out. So this district, for instance, is getting $61 million. That's San Diego Unified School District, which is next to San Diego State, where I teach. Now, $61 million is a lot of money. How will this district use these funds to ensure that legislatively protected youth get the additional support and services they need? If you want to know, their plan is now up on the internet. Most plans now have been posted. It's July, and you can see how have these funds been spent. And $61 million should buy a lot of support and intervention for those students. Again, the regulations on LCSF are silent on the way school counselors support these vital and necessary services. So, somebody has to be the voice for the students. Somebody has to say, look, what are we doing additionally for language learners? What are we doing for limited England? What are we doing for our foster youth? If not the school counselor, then who? And it should not only be the school counselor. Everyone who cares about outcomes for students, and making sure that all students graduate from high school, college and career ready, should care about how funds are being spent. This does not mean they all need to be spent on school counselors. It means we need to look to see in what way are the funds being spent, how are school counselors being funded, are they district funded, are they funded through local control accountability, the local control funding formula? Are there additional counselors being hired to support the needs of legislatively protected youth? Are they going to ask the current school counselors to add on services for legislatively protected youth with more funds or not? What is happening to the entire student services program, the comprehensive program, and how will there be a basic and additional program for those youth? This would be the question I would ask, and I would ask that school counselors work with others in their school, work with others in the community to take a look at these plans that are required to be public and see, are the needs of the students being met, and in what way are school counselors a part of that? For instance, with EL students, maybe they need more college and career and financial support because for some of these students, particularly first-generation students, this is the first time families, parents, students might know anyone that has gone to college. Therefore, you can't assume that people just understand the language, and we must begin early in a student's career and in a family's experience with our schools, in elementary and middle school, teaching language of college and career readiness and financial aid literacy, and teaching all families, particularly EL students and their families, because we want to make sure that they understand their native language and that it's appropriately translated, all of the requirements that are necessary, whether they are documented or not, whether their what the possibilities are to participate in the DREAM Act, because the misconception that so often families receive is that their child may not go to college, and this is absolutely not true. Who better than the school counselor to begin sending this message very early on in the family and the student's career that every student can graduate from high school prepared to go on to college if they choose to, and that financial aid support and assistance and financial opportunities do exist, and that we need to make sure that the families and the students are literate in terms of understanding all of the requirements beginning early in elementary school and throughout all the way to high school. Foster youth, a huge amount of support necessary because of the transition issues that occur so often with our foster youth. We need to be very creative regarding the credit earning options, as well as being very diligent to understand how to read these transcripts and make sure that no student is missing out on appropriate credits just because they came from another school that might have a course that the counselor doesn't understand. Working closely with the registrar, doing some investigation, and taking the time to understand what was the content of this course might take a class that previously wasn't college prep and provide some college prep opportunities for that student. It's so important that the school counselor really be a detective with regard to the transcripts, to make sure that we offer the students the most opportunity to get college preparatory credit. And this goes the same with students transferring in from Mexico or any other country that has a transcript that's in another language, that the school counselors are very well knowledgeable about how do you interpret the transcript, how do you give the appropriate credit. This takes time. This is the type of work that does need additional funding, that can't just be added on to the school counselor's plate. When you go to the trouble of taking what might be in the type of college and career readiness program that you have in a community where you have no EL students and no first generation students, and you try to take that curriculum and bring it into families who have no previous experience and have cultural and language barriers for them historically within our school systems, and we don't go to take the trouble to redesign, reorganize, and rethink the way this curriculum is delivered and evaluated to make sure the parents understand it, the students understand it. This type of additional work requires additional funding. It's going to require training. It's going to require professional development. It's going to require more. And this is the kind of thing that these funds were targeted for, purchasing the type of time, talent, and professional development and human capacity necessary to support the students, the families, and the teachers to understand as well the impact of a student's access to a course or not. Low-income students may need things like technology assistance or fee waivers. In schools that have 55% or more of students who are legislatively protected, you can see how the work of a school counselor is very busy and can take a lot more time and requires a lower ratio or additional assistance. In addition to the fact that they often benefit from frequent monitoring in terms of progress and parental and guardian assistance in all of the areas. So legislatively protected youth need more, and they're trained and school counselors are particularly trained to do this work, and those who aren't need to get this training, and that's what these funds can be spent on. Prevention and intervention for all students, but particularly more for those students identified as EL, LI, and FY. For instance, Marta. Marta moved from Mexico and enrolled in 8th grade, and she spoke no English. In high school, she was initially placed in English language development, a general education non-college prep class. Marta's 9th grade school counselor noticed her strong academic performance and encouraged her to take English 1. He also recommended she apply to 10th grade AVID, but she was not initially accepted. So what did her counselor do? Her counselor advocated for her admission into the AVID program. Without the school counselor, this student would not have made it into AVID. Marta's school counselor was Homero Magana. Homero Magana was a school counselor who himself had come from Mexico as a middle school student, and he needed support to find out what were the appropriate courses to take when he was getting ready to go on after high school. Marta was fortunate that Homero, as her school counselor, the son of a migrant worker, took her under his wing. And determined to attend college after high school, he himself attended a community college, transferred to and graduated from UC Berkeley, and received his master's degree from San Diego State. And I'm proud to say he was my graduate assistant 1 year, and recently had an opportunity to go to the White House to talk about the needs of students, English language learning students, and the special support and assistance that they often require that take additional time from counselors and that must be accounted for in the work we're doing. Homero became a school counselor to serve as a student advocate because he wanted to ensure that all those students who have no voice have an opportunity to achieve at their greatest potential. Now, how is Marta doing? Well, Marta's school counselor is helping her to reach her hopes and dreams because now she's in 11th grade, she's in her 2nd year of AVID, she's enrolled in college prep, and in 4 advanced placement classes. Homero is boasting often that she's passed her AP Spanish exam. She received a 5. She's getting a B in AP English and has a 3.5 GPA. Now, she's an undocumented student, but he's going to assist her in applying for the DREAM Act. And Homero is confident that, like many other EL students he has advocated for since becoming a school counselor, Marta will fulfill her dreams and her hopes of attending college one day. Katrina is another student. Katrina was a low-income 3rd grade student who was often later absent. Katrina's mother had Katrina walk to school after receiving a SARB letter. She was afraid that she would get in trouble. So she, instead of having Katrina miss school, she had her walk to school because they had no car, and her mother was concerned that they would get in trouble if she didn't get to school on time. So the school counselor, and I'll say at this time, this was me, many years ago, offered Katrina, observed her one day as she was shuffling slowly to class, and her knees were very swollen. And I remember learning that Katrina had rheumatoid arthritis, and although she was not medicated, and because she was not medicated, she painfully walked to school. And this, I remember seeing it the first time and thinking it was one of the most painful things I'd ever observed, because this little girl was just shuffling along, trying to get to school, and her mother didn't want to get in trouble, and she didn't want child welfare coming to her home, and yet this poor little girl needed help and assistance because she was in pain trying to get herself to school. Katrina was fortunate that as an elementary counselor, I had the time, and I was full-time at the school at this time as an elementary counselor in a school of 500 to 1, and I was able to support her mother. And together, we were able to go through what I call the complex labyrinth to secure transportation for Katrina, to secure her physical therapy, additional medication, some counseling for her mother, and her family, and some guidance and support for her mother in terms of how she could ask for help next time without fear that something bad would happen to her. And this is often the struggle for parents, and low-income parents, any parents really, who don't understand how the system works. As student advocates for the student and the parent, we can help parents and families understand how these systems work. These are complicated systems. You know, even people with many degrees can be very confused about how things work. It often happens to me. And so we just need someone to help us, someone who's not going to judge us, and someone who's not going to just punish us or threaten us, but someone who says, I'll help you do this. Katrina's mother wasn't a bad mother. She was doing the best she could, but her daughter needed help, the kind of help Katrina's mother couldn't get on her own. After receiving these interventions, Katrina and her attendance improved dramatically. Michelle was a foster student, and she'd had multiple foster placements, resulting in a confusing academic transcript and credit deficiency. And although her alternative education was initially considered when she came into the district where I formerly worked, I remember working with Michelle's high school counselor, who advocated to create an academic plan for credit recovery so that she could stay in high school and stay in the campus of the high school. And they held regular check-ins, and Michelle and her teachers and her foster parents met. But this was the kind of school counselor that said, you know, they traditionally put these students in alternative ed. But Michelle wants to graduate from high school and go to college, and she's committed to wanting to be in a traditional high school. And she advocated for Michelle to stay on that campus, and she worked with her to be creative with her academic plan of credit recovery. And with the support and dedication of her school counselor, she earned enough credits to be back on track. And she became also the active custodian of her own records. She was able to learn and understand from the school counselor how to be her own advocate, to understand how the system worked, so that if she were to be moved again, and she actually was moved again, she could be her own advocate the next time if, unfortunately, she was in a situation where she didn't have someone to be an advocate with and for her. So by becoming the active custodian, she gained this knowledge of graduation requirements and college requirements, and she learned the benefits that were available to her also because of her school counselor of going to college, because there are many, many benefits available to foster youth in terms of going to college and funding and such. So this is the type of work that the school counselor can do. So as we come to the end of, towards the end of the presentation, I think, I would like to encourage people to think about acting. I hear a lot of people complaining about LCFF and LCAP, and the counselors are included or they're not included. And I would ask us to stop complaining and start acting. No student or parent, particularly those in protected youth, should have to hope that the local board of education will choose to allocate funds for school counselors. Neither should any counselor just hope that someone's going to do the right thing. This is not to say that people aren't trying to do the right thing. It is to say that, unfortunately, there are places where people, even with their best intentions, are not considering the opportunities that are out there. It could be because they've never had a counselor and they don't know what they could be doing. It could be because they had a school counselor who believed that their role was more therapeutic than the way we train school counselors today. It could be because they had a school counselor who for whatever reason wasn't able or willing or choosing or allowed to do the type of work that today's school counselors are charged to do. Let's not look past and try to figure out why it wasn't the way it was. I'm asking us to look forward and to say to local decision makers, look, you are the only ones who can ensure students receive college and career readiness information. You're the only ones who are going to be able to say we have the personnel ready with the academic behavior interventions to do the 4-year plans that are needed by a credentialed school counselor. These school counseling programs and services should be a right, not a privilege for every student, but particularly a right, a civil right, for all those who need and deserve more. And who better than the school counselor to be that advocate? So silence is not golden. School counselors, I know that many of you sometimes are polite and are patient and you don't toot your horns, and I'm asking you to stop that. Because if you do not step up and advocate for these students with the same passion and advocacy that you would add for a student who is a victim of child abuse, then we're not doing our job as professional school counselors and as social justice advocates. And as administrators, I'm asking you to support and empower your school counselor as they stand up and be advocates for students, and partner with them on your leadership teams to do this. It will be up to local decision makers to determine how these fundings will be spent, and if any student will receive these vital services or not. Will they only be available for the privileged few? Will there only be random acts of school counseling? Let's take a look at the timeline and let's see where we are now. In January, they adopted the regulations. Then they adopted the template. Then they had to adopt the LCAP. And in July, they had to adopt the annual update. In July 1st, restrictions on spending for adult debt, okay, those expire. And in October 1st, they must adopt the new evaluation rubrics. And July 1st again, the districts will adopt the LCAP annual updates. You can see now we're at the end of 2014. This goes all the way to 2017. So, July 1st just happened. Districts must adopt these LCAP plans. Now what do we need to do? On October 8th it says COE must approve or reject the district's LCAP. This means between July and October, the COEs are going to approve or reject them. The county offices of education will be looking to see, do these LCAP plans meet our requirements in the 8 areas? You can sit back and be quiet if you want and hope that whoever is reading them at the county office is thinking about this through the same lens that you are. You can hope that there's somebody there who understands it as thoroughly and as deeply as you do. I certainly hope that's the case. I know that, well, I can give a shout out to Riverside County office and Rick Lenore because I know that he is on top of this. I don't know all the others, but I hope that they are as on top of it as he is, and I want to believe that they are. But hoping and believing is not going to guarantee the students what they deserve, and so I'm asking us to all be diligent. I'm asking to make your voice heard. I'm asking you to take a look at the plans. Every student, like Katrina and Marta and Michelle, needs a school counselor like Omaro was. Who's going to be their advocate? So you have to participate in your communities of conversation. Advocate for the services. Look, just because the plan is finished now does not mean that you can't make adjustments. Go back to this slide and look. July 1st, it had to be adopted, but that's the first round. It's the district's best first try, but it's not permanent. This means we have time. Everyone has time. We are all learning at this, and everyone is trying to see how do we make them better. So, be a participant. Take a look at them. Volunteer to be on a committee to review others. Be an active player in this work, because over the next year or two, very big decisions will be made. Use your power and your voice. If there are more surveys, ask, hey, you're asking which of these 3s do you prioritize. If you don't see school counseling on the survey, it's not a good survey. I'd say that. I can't tell you how many surveys I looked on the internet and saw. Of these different services, which ones would you prioritize? And school counseling wasn't there. Or they left a blank box that said, enter the services you prioritize. But how is someone who's a parent or a teacher, even anyone, going to think of all the services just out of their head? You have to have a list of the ones. And further, I'm getting passionate here, what would happen if people just assume, well, those services are already paid by the district, but then they're not? We have to have full disclosure and say, these are being paid by the district, these were paid before, they will or they will not be paid now, and we have to ask ourselves, how will students get what they need? Also, as school counselors and administrators, please share the difference your school counselors make each day in the lives of students they serve. There are so many great results coming out. I know Catalina Fuentes at Riverside County has made big changes in Santana High School. I know, but when she was there, they worked to create those changes, and she created many forms and is helping many other districts now to begin to collect this data. Don't keep the data in your pocket, in your desk drawer, on your computer. Make your data and your voices heard. Be a voice for the voiceless. Show the difference you're making. If you don't see where counselors have been funded enough, your ratios are too high, and you know you need more, take a look at how the money was being spent. And you have the right to say to them, you spent this much money on this new program. Do we have any outcomes to show that this is making a difference? Because let me show you what school counseling can do. And it's important for us to be that strong an advocate. I wish I could say it wasn't necessary, but it is. Because if we're not going to be the advocates for students, who will? School counseling is just not required in the state of California and in many other states. Now is the time for us to use our voices to talk about what they all deserve to receive. It's really important we don't just say, oh, we need more counselors. No, students need more services and interventions and opportunities and access. We are the service providers. School counselors are the service providers for that to occur. If you want more information on LCFF and LCAP, you can take a look at these two documents here. There's also, it's an interesting thing I wanted you to notice if you're a school counselor, that if you're an advocate for the arts, you can go to this website and see how they've really put together a nice toolkit to advocate for their efforts in the arts. I think the arts are terrific. Nothing against the arts. I'm just saying, where's ours? We need one too. We all need to advocate. It's not competition, it's education. Full disclosure, full transparency, full opportunity to make decisions on how funds are made. When people sit in the room and they look at the beautiful advocacy for arts or music or any other thing, career technical education programs or school counseling or nursing or librarians, whatever it is, we need to make sure that everyone has presented the information, the opportunities, and what students will receive. And then intelligent people, passionate people, people who care about the community and the students they serve should make the decision. My goal in this PowerPoint is not to say that only school counselors should be funded. I know I come from that perspective because I have been a school counselor my whole career, and yes, I belong to the religion of school counseling. I admit this. The point is that students need to get what they deserve to receive. And I want school counselors to be as strong an advocate for the services students receive from them as every other program and service is going to be for themselves. And then as people decide and make decisions, they do it with their eyes wide open, the information in front of them, and they make the right decisions for their students. But to trust and to hope that they're going to make it without your advocacy, that is to let the students down from the opportunities that might have been available to them had only the team known. When I look at the plans, I know I'm going to be disappointed in some districts. But the question is not, did the people not make the right decision? The people probably made the best decision they could with the information they had. Do you have information about how your students are different as a result of a school counseling program? Can you show people specifically what you would do to make a difference as a school counselor? If you go onto my website and look at my other blog, there's one on legislatively protected youth and the way school counselors specifically work with them that I drafted with Loretta Whitson, who is the executive director of CASC, and it's on the website. Take a look at this. Look at the types of things that school counselors can do to make a difference in each of those 8 areas in detail. And now I want to thank you for listening. I know it's been long. I've enjoyed sharing this with you. I will tell you that I did it while I was sitting in a room with a view in Ia Santorini, Greece, which is why you might hear a little bit of something. But this is the moment I was moved today to say it's time to put my voice to this PowerPoint. So please, I hope it helps you to advocate for the students we serve. They deserve you, and thank you so much